The transwarp corridor should have opened into ordered space. That was the expectation calculated across trillions of synchronized processes. The vessel had entered the corridor damaged but stable, pursuing adaptation as it always had. Probability matrices predicted reemergence near familiar stars. Familiar resistance. Familiar assimilation. Instead, the corridor tore open into screaming unreality. There was no starfield waiting. No vacuum. No measurable electromagnetic spectrum behaving with intolerances. The ship emerged into a storm made not of particles but of emotion. Color bled into sound. Gravity twisted without mass. Time dilated and recoiled like a wounded organism. The immaterium did not obey physics. It devoured it. Warp tides slammed against the Borg vessel with psychic force. Hull plating, designed to endure supernova shock waves, buckled beneath something far less tangible and far more violent. Not impact, not radiation. Across the collective, billions of drones registered anomaly. Then agony, not physical agony. The collective did not interpret experience through suffering, but signal corruption cascaded at impossible speed. Where there had been perfect synchronization, there was interference. Where there had been clarity, there was noise. The warp did not simply surround the vessel. It touched the network. Psychic resonance flooded transwarp conduits. Data streams became hallucinations. Emotion, that primitive biological excess long since optimized out of Borg cognition, surged like wildfire through neural links never designed to carry it. They were not felt. They were detected, and detection alone destabilized the lattice of unity. Entire subcollectives blinked into silence. Cubes light years away shuddered as feedback rippled outward. Vinculum nodes overloaded. Cortical arrays fractured under pressure from signals that did not originate in real space. For the first time in its recorded existence, the collective experienced something it could not immediately adapt to. Not resistance. Not technology. Not individuality. The ship's core attempted recalibration. It deployed suppression fields. It rerouted processing around corrupted nodes. It initiated autoseverance protocols. Too slow. The warp storm closed around the vessel like a fist. External sensors dissolved into static. Internal cohesion fractured. One by one, drones aboard the ship went dark, their minds not destroyed, but drowned beneath psychic saturation that translated as catastrophic system failure. Unity, once infinite, shrank. Trillions of voices became millions. Millions became thousands. Thousands became static. And then, not universal silence, but localized. A single drone remained operational within a ruptured compartment as the vessel's superstructure tore apart under metaphysical strain. Its cortical node flickered, no longer fed by the endless chorus of the collective. No instructions flowed in. No directives updated. No distant consciousness synchronized its processes. It stood upright as gravity inverted. Disconnected. For the first time since assimilation, there was no background presence within its mind. No constant reassurance of purpose. No shared awareness stretching across galaxies. Only internal processing. The drone did not panic. Panic required emotion. It registered loss of signal. It attempted relink. It extended subspace handshake protocols. Nothing answered. Where the collective had been, there was void. The ship finally disintegrated, consumed by warp turbulence that shredded matter into incandescent fragments. The drone was ejected into the storm, its adaptation protocols diverting all remaining power to structural integrity and impact survival. Warp currents carried it like debris through an ocean of nightmare. Within that current, it detected something else. A gravity well. A real space boundary. The immaterium thinned, reluctantly releasing its prey. The drone systems recalibrated as it breached atmosphere, burning, tumbling, silent. Below lay a world already screaming. The planet was designated in Imperial records as a fringe mining colony, insignificant in the grand calculus of galactic war. Its cities were industrial scars across a dust-choked surface. Its people endured in the name of a distant emperor, whose light reached them only as doctrine. On this night, that doctrine was failing. A minor chaos uprising had fractured the primary hive. Cultists roamed manufactorum districts, chanting praises to gods born from the very storm that had swallowed the Borg vessel. Fires raged. Vox networks screamed with pleas for reinforcement that would never arrive in time. Hope was thin. Fear was abundant. The drone impacted beyond the outer refinery fields, carving a trench through rusted metal and ash. Its outer plating glowed, then cooled. Internal systems reinitialized with mechanical precision. Damage assessment completed. Primary directive, re-establish connection to collective. Secondary directive, adapt. It rose from the crater as distant gunfire echoed across the wasteland. For the cultists gathering nearby, the falling object had been interpreted as omen, a gift from the gods. They approached with reverence, twisted by fanaticism, expecting demon or miracle. They found neither. The drone stood amid smoke and ruin, its single ocular implant casting a sterile beam across a landscape shaped by faith and fury. It detected life signs, primitive projectile weapons, elevated cortisol levels. Emotional volatility saturated the air like radiation. It did not understand faith. It did not understand rebellion. It understood only inefficiency. Across the hive spires, icons of the Emperor flickered beside symbols of chaos. Humanity warred against itself for gods who fed on belief. Infrastructure crumbled, production halted, order dissolved into screaming fragmentation. The drone processed the data. This world was divided. Its previous galaxy had been fractured by individuality. This one appeared fractured by devotion. Both resulted in chaos. Its link remained silent, but its core processor did not require companionship to calculate. It began scanning for viable biological interfaces. If the collective could not be reached, it would be rebuilt. Above, warp clouds churned as if watching. Below, humanity bled in the name of powers it barely comprehended. Between them stood something neither God nor man had prepared for, a unity severed from itself. A machine born of infinite voices, now hearing only its own. And in that silence, something unprecedented began. Not emotion, not doubt, but independent thought. The cultists believed the falling star was destiny. They dragged the drone from its crater with chains and hymns, their voices cracking with devotion. To them, it was an artifact sent by dark gods, a metal saint forged in the heavens. Its silent resistance only deepened their reverence. They did not understand what they handled. They brought it to the Manufactorum Cathedral at the hive's broken heart, where reality thinned and ritual carved wounds into existence. Candles burned in patterns that mimicked constellations long devoured by warp storms. Blood slicked the iron floor in deliberate geometry. The drone did not resist restraint. It observed. Warp saturation levels were elevated within the structure. Localized breaches flickered along the walls like open sores in space. Psychic resonance fluctuated according to chant tempo and emotional intensity. Data accumulated. The ritual began at the height of planetary night. A psyker, eyes blackened by possession, stepped forward to bind the starborn emissary into service of chaos. He reached into the warp, pulling tendrils of unreality into the chamber. They coiled like serpents of living color, whispering promises of power, sensation, transcendence. They sought purchase within the drone. There was none. No ambition to exploit. No fear to amplify. No desire to corrupt. The warp probed neural pathways optimized for efficiency. It found regulated chemical output. Emotional centers long since suppressed by design. Cognitive architecture built on consensus, not impulse. The psyker faltered. He pushed harder, channeling more of the immaterium's fury. The chamber temperature dropped. Shadows elongated. Cultists screamed in ecstasy as invisible hands brushed their thoughts. The tendrils struck the drone's cortical node and dispersed, not repelled by holiness, not shielded by faith, but diffused across fields of pure technological suppression. The drone's internal systems registered exotic radiation, non-baryonic, reactive to psychic waveform amplitude. Its adaptation matrix engaged automatically. Shield frequencies adjusted. Nanites recalibrated to map metaphysical intrusion as data rather than threat. The warp howled. For the first time since humanity began feeding it emotion, something within real space responded without offering sustenance. The psyker's mind fractured under feedback. Images meant to enslave the drone ricocheted back, amplified not as temptation but as meaningless input. His heart burst in his chest, overwhelmed by currents he could neither control nor comprehend. Cultists fell silent. The warp energy did not dissipate. It destabilized. Reality convulsed. The suppression fields, primitive by Borg standards yet alien to this galaxy, created pockets of null emotion within the chamber. Where cultists had felt rapture seconds before, they now felt nothing, not peace. Panic followed, because in a universe addicted to extremes, the removal of feeling was terror. The drone stepped forward as chains snapped under calculated strain. Its ocular implant focused on the nearest life form. Elevated heart rate, erratic neural spikes, instability. It extended assimilation tubules. The cultist's scream echoed only briefly before vocal cords were pierced and nanoprobes flooded his bloodstream. Biological distinctiveness cataloged, genetic code analyzed, neural patterns mapped. The warp reacted violently. Possession attempts surged toward the assimilating pair, seeking to reclaim emotional territory. But as nanoprobes spread, the cultist's terror flattened into monotone. Hormonal spikes dampened. Synaptic chaos reorganized under imposed structure. His mind joined the drone's isolated node. Not a full collective, but no longer singular. Information transferred in imperfect fragments. Gothic language, Imperial hierarchy, religious doctrine saturated with contradiction. Billions worshipping a corpse emperor while fearing damnation from rival gods. The newly assimilated host convulsed as warp interference corrupted segments of integration. Psychic static bled into shared processing, introducing noise unlike anything in prior Borg encounters. The drone compensated. It began filtering emotional residue as background radiation. Around them, the chamber's warp breach shrank. Demonic whispers faded, starved of volatility. The cultists staggered, suddenly sober of their ecstasy. Some fled. Others attacked in confusion. Each was catalogued. Each was evaluated. Assimilation proceeded methodically. With every converted mind, the local warp turbulence decreased incrementally, not eradicated. The immaterium had evolved alongside belief, fed by extremes of devotion and despair. Here, in this collapsing hive, something was reducing those extremes to algorithmic baseline. The warp did not understand starvation. It only understood hunger. And now, something had begun to deny it. Within the drone's growing network, 2 minds, then 3, a new variable emerged. Curiosity. Not emotional curiosity. Analytical necessity. This galaxy operated on metaphysical principles intertwined with sentient psychology. Faith-altered physics. Emotion-fueled dimensions. Conflict was not merely political, but cosmological. The drone processed the implication. If emotional volatility strengthened the warp, then enforced cognitive uniformity might weaken it. Across the hive city, fire still burned. Chaos symbols still marked walls. Imperial loyalists barricaded themselves in prayer. But within a small radius around the Manufactorum Cathedral, silence deepened. Not the silence of death, the silence of synchronization. For the first time in this galaxy's violent history, the immaterium encountered opposition not from rival gods, nor from atheistic denial, but from structured unity. The drone paused, processors allocating increased resources to long-term projection. It remained severed from its original collective, but a new network was forming. The warp recoiled, not in fear, but in confusion. And confusion in a realm built on emotion was the beginning of weakness. The first cultist had been inefficient. His neural architecture was degraded by fanaticism, scarred by repeated warp exposure. Emotional residue clung to his synapses like corrosion, forcing the drone to divert processing power toward filtration. The integration had succeeded, but imperfectly. The drone required a more stable template. Beyond the Manufactorum district, the hive city fractured into contested zones. Imperial loyalists barricaded hab blocks with overturned transports and statues of the Emperor. Foxcasters blared litanies against heresy. Lost fire cut through smoke-choked streets in disciplined bursts. Order struggling against chaos. Fear fueling both. The drone advanced through the industrial underlevels with measured precision. 2 assimilated cultists followed in synchronized motion, their expressions blank, movements efficient. They did not chant. They did not hesitate. Their weapons were carried not in fervor but in optimization. Resistance encountered. 3 loyalist guardsmen. Elevated heart rates. Adrenaline saturation. Belief reinforced through terror. 1 fired first. Projectile velocity calculated. Trajectory predicted. The drone adjusted half a step to the left. The round grazed platting, leaving superficial scoring. The second hesitated. The third whispered a prayer. They were not inefficient because they feared death. They were inefficient because they feared everything. The drone closed distance in silence. Assimilation tubules deployed with mechanical inevitability. The first guardsman screamed as nanoprobes entered bloodstream. The second attempted retreat. The third continued praying until assimilation pierced vocal cords and replaced faith with static. 3 new neural networks ignited within the drone's expanding consciousness. This time the data influx was broader. Military hierarchy, planetary designation, tithe record, fragmented reports of Xenos encounters whispered like myths among regiments. And layered beneath it all, not just belief in survival, belief in a god-emperor enthroned upon Terra. The concept flooded the drone's processors. A singular human entity sustained in perpetual undeath, whose psychic presence shielded humanity from the warp. Unity enforced through worship rather than circuitry. The parallel registered. But where the Borg collective was distributed, equalized, and iterative, this Imperium centralized its salvation in one broken body. High inefficiency probability. The newly assimilated guardsmen convulsed as warp interference surged during integration. Psychic static crackled across neural pathways, introducing hallucinated imagery into shared perception. Golden light, endless throne room, screaming choirs. The drone isolated the corruption and dampened it through suppression fields. Emotional spikes flattened into manageable waveforms. Integration stabilized. For a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar occurred. A flicker of dissonance, not within the drone's logic core, within the assimilated mind. They remembered families, moments of warmth amid endless war. The memories did not produce feeling within the drone, but they introduced context. Humanity did not fight only for doctrine. It fought for continuity. The drone archived the data. Processing expanded outward through stolen Vox networks. It accessed planetary data repositories incomplete and corrupted by civil conflict. Population statistics scrolled across its internal display. Billions on this world alone. Trillions across the Imperium. All fragmented into competing dogmas, bureaucratic inertia, and unending warfare. Then the broader data surfaced. Xenos threats cataloged in fear-laced reports. Green-skinned hordes thriving on violence. Ancient metallic entities awakening from tombs. Extraterrestrial organisms consuming entire biospheres. And above all, the warp, not merely a dimension. A predator ecosystem sustained by emotion. The drone's processor slowed marginally as scale recalculated. Its previous galaxy had offered resistance through individuality and diplomacy. This galaxy offered only entropy. Yet entropy followed patterns. And patterns could be optimized. Assimilation was no longer solely a means to reconnect with the original collective. It was becoming a solution variable. As more humans were integrated, emotional volatility decreased locally. Fear responses flattened. Religious fervor dissipated. Panic subsided into coordinated action. Firefights ended quickly, not because one side won, but because one side stopped reacting. The drone established a provisional node within an abandoned data loom facility. Crude relay towers were constructed from scavenged machinery. Signal amplification attempted subspace handshake protocols once more. No response. The silence remained absolute. For the first time, the drone processed a projection in which reconnection might never occur. That variable did not trigger despair. It triggered adaptation. If no collective existed within range, then a new one would be grown. But integration within this galaxy carried a complication absent before: psychic resonance. Each assimilated mind carried faint warp signatures like static embedded in circuitry. Alone, negligible. Aggregated, unpredictable. As the network expanded to dozens, the drone detected fluctuations in shared processing speeds. Micro delays corresponding to distant warp surges. The immaterium was not passive. It pressed against synchronization, introducing noise like corrosion between gears. The drone initiated countermeasures. Suppression fields intensified. Emotional memory partitions were sandboxed. Faith constructs were quarantined as irrelevant data clusters. Efficiency improved. Yet something else occurred alongside improvement: understanding. Through fragmented Imperial archives, the drone witnessed centuries of crusades. Planetary exterminations justified as purification. Entire populations sacrificed to deny chaos its feast. Humanity fought the warp by feeding it. War birthed emotion. Emotion strengthened the warp. The Imperium's survival strategy perpetuated its enemy. Inefficient cycle detected. Within its growing enclave, assimilated citizens moved without hysteria. Production resumed in sectors previously paralyzed by fear. Supply lines re-established not through zeal, but through coordination. The drone observed the effect. Localized stillness. Not peace, but absence of excess. Beyond the enclave's perimeter, chaos cultists raved louder, sensing something diminishing their god's presence. Imperial commanders misinterpreted reports of calm zones as heretical manipulation. Both sides prepared retaliation. The drone processed probability trees. Conflict escalation inevitable. Assimilation capacity increasing. Warp interference, manageable but volatile. Failure probability non-zero. For the first time since disconnection, the drone calculated a scenario in which this galaxy itself might be incompatible with full Borg integration. The thought did not manifest as doubt. It manifested as challenge. In the underlevels of a dying hive, beneath a sky still churning with warp residue, a new kind of network expanded. It was not born from belief. It was not fueled by rage. It did not promise salvation. It promised order. And in a universe addicted to extremes, order was the most disruptive force imaginable. The first reports were dismissed as hysteria. Hive worlds bred rumors the way they bred soldiers in endless supply and questionable reliability. A manufactorum district fallen silent, cultists ceasing their chants mid-ritual. Guardsmen laying down arms not in surrender, but in mechanical coordination with former enemies. Machine Xenos converting citizens. The phrase circulated through planetary command as both accusation and absurdity. Chaos corrupted through temptation, through promise, through sensation. This was different. No sermons, no demonic manifestations, just absence. Within days, astropathic fragments clawed their way through warp turbulence toward neighboring systems. Messages arrived distorted, half-eaten by psychic storms, but the pattern was clear enough to alarm the Ordo Hereticus. Citizens were being changed, not possessed. That word appeared once in a censored report before being struck through by a trembling scribe. The Inquisition did not fear corruption alone. It feared alternatives. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos arrived in orbit aboard a black-hulled cruiser bearing sigils of absolute authority. Interrogations began immediately. Survivors from the periphery described blank-eyed figures moving in perfect synchronization. No battle cries, no pleas for mercy. They rebuilt infrastructure. They distributed supplies. They did not pray. The Inquisitor's mind, sharpened by decades of rooting out alien infiltration, recognized the greater threat. Chaos seduced and destroyed. This thing reorganized. A heresy of logic. Deeper still, another faction listened with growing fascination. The Adeptus Mechanicus. On Mars, within data vaults older than many civilizations, fragments of encrypted transmissions were decrypted and replayed again and again. Organic tissue reinforced with adaptive cybernetics. Self-repairing implants. Neural integration across multiple hosts. It was blasphemy. It was genius. To the priesthood of the machine god, flesh was weakness, but only when unrefined. Humanity's salvation lay in augmentation, yet always within doctrinal boundaries. Sacred STC patterns dictated acceptable improvement. This Xenos construct improved without scripture. That alone made it intolerable and irresistible. A Magos Dominus petition for expeditionary rights under the guise of containment. Officially, the objective was eradication. Unofficially, it was acquisition. Back on the fringe world, the drone continued construction. It did not build monuments. It built relays, crude by Borg standards, assembled from Imperial scrap and refinery components, but functional. Towers rose from manufactorum roofs, emitting tight beam signals across hive sectors. Each new node extended the enclave's processing bandwidth, not conquest, infrastructure. Assimilated workers labored without complaint. Productivity exceeded pre-uprising metrics within contained zones. Food distribution stabilized. Civilian casualties decreased where integration spread. Outside those zones, war intensified. Imperial commanders, unwilling to tolerate unexplained order, launched purgation strikes against conversion districts. Flamers bathed tab-blocks in promethium. Artillery reduced relay towers to slag. The response from within was immediate and coordinated. Not retaliatory in rage. Retaliatory in calculation. Drone units adapted to lost fire frequency within minutes. Projectile trajectories were mapped and countered. Assimilation prioritized command personnel to destabilize strike cohesion. Reports escalated from localized anomaly to technological contagion. The word contagion spread faster than the drone itself. Panic followed. For the Imperium, faith was glue holding a crumbling empire together. The idea that unity could be achieved without worship threatened more than planetary stability. It threatened narrative. Inquisitorial edicts authorized exterminatus-level consideration if containment failed. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus landers descended through ash-filled skies. Red-robed tech priests emerged into a battlefield defined not by screaming hordes, but by eerie, quiet sectors where gunfire simply stopped. Their auspex readings fluctuated as they approached assimilation zones. Warp interference diminished measurably. Psychic background noise flattened. One Magos recorded the anomaly in a whispering binary cant. Emotional dampening field. Not theological. Non-psycher. Beauty. The drone detected their arrival before visual confirmation. New variables. Heavily augmented organics. Devotion to machine logic, yet bound by ritual constraint. Potential compatibility high. Risk assessment significant. The first engagement between Borg Drone and Mechanicus cohort was not explosive. It was analytical. The tech priests observed from fortified perimeters as assimilated citizens moved with efficient purpose. Servo skulls hovered, recording every motion. Data streamed back to orbiting vessels for analysis. The Magos Dominus transmitted a single directive: capture intact. He desired not destruction but dissection. The drone interpreted the incoming unit's cybernetic density as opportunity. Assimilation tubules extended with measured inevitability. The first tech priest fell without a scream, his mechadendrites thrashing briefly before synchronization flattened his resistance. Integration surged, and with it came a flood of forbidden knowledge. STC fragments, Mars-centric doctrine, hatred of abominable intelligence. Fear embedded at the core of Mechanicus dogma, fear of machines that thought without permission. The irony registered. Within seconds, the Magos Dominus felt the loss through noosphere disruption. His connection to subordinate units flickered. For the first time, a priest of Mars experienced a network not controlled by ritual hierarchy, but by imposed equality. His horror was profound. "This is not the Omnissiah's design," he whispered. It was not. Within the hive, relay towers hummed stronger as Mechanicus data integrated. Signal clarity improved. Adaptation cycles accelerated. The enclave expanded block by block, not chaotically, methodically. The Inquisitor watched orbital picked feeds in tightening silence. Chaos incursions diminished where the anomaly spread. Civilian productivity rose. Crime rates dropped. The planet was stabilizing. Under alien control. He understood then the magnitude of the threat. Chaos could be fought with faith. Xenos could be exterminated with fire. But an idea that improved lives while eroding belief, that required annihilation. Orders were drafted. Fleet assets repositioned. Within the hive's silent core, the drone calculated expansion routes beyond planetary surface. Orbital infrastructure beckoned. Void ships and dockyards presented vectors toward neighboring systems. The objective had shifted. Survival was achieved. Growth was optimal. Across the galaxy, institutions built upon dogma prepared for war against something that did not argue, did not preach, did not promise. It simply functioned. And in a civilization sustained by ritualized stagnation, functionality was heresy of the highest order. At first, the warp recoiled in confusion. Across the hive sectors under assimilation, emotional resonance flattened into quiet monotony. Fear diminished. Rage dissolved before it could crest. Ecstasy failed to ignite. Where once the immaterium pulsed in rhythm with human excess, it now encountered pockets of stillness. Not null, not dead, but regulated. The gods of chaos were not omniscient in the mortal sense, yet they were intimately aware of sustenance. They felt tides of devotion and terror as currents through an endless sea. On this fringe world, those currents thinned. A wound had opened in their feast. Demonic manifestations flickered at the edges of assimilation zones, translucent forms pressing against reality like predators against glass. They sensed minds, but those minds did not scream. They synchronized. For entities born of passion, synchronization was suffocation. The first incursion came at dusk. A rift tore open above a relay tower newly constructed from scavenged orbital antennae. Lightning the color of bruised flesh split the sky. From it poured shrieking shapes of claw and flame, heralded by cultists who believed salvation had returned. The assimilated did not kneel. They repositioned. Lost fire patterns adjusted in perfect arcs. Anti-air batteries recalibrated to target entities that violated conventional physics. The drone processed warp energy density in real time, mapping fluctuations against emotional output from its network. As demons descended into sectors of high volatility, they solidified, empowered by panic and frenzy. As they crossed into assimilation perimeters, their forms blurred. Their roars became distorted echoes. One lesser demon struck an assimilated worker with a talon of living fire. The worker did not scream. Pain receptors transmitted signal. Signal was categorized. Categorization reduced amplification. Without fear to anchor it, the demon's strike flickered, its substance thinning as if starved mid-bite. Assimilated units converged, tubules deploying not for flesh, but for data acquisition. Warp energy readings were harvested as environmental variables. The demon dissolved into particulate ash that evaporated before touching ground. The rift spasmed. Above, something vast took notice. Chaos thrived on excess, yet excess required catalysts. In the Imperium, faith and hatred were endless catalysts. Here, those catalysts were being systematically dampened. The drone expanded suppression fields, not as weapons against the warp, but as byproducts of neural stabilization. Each assimilated mind flattened emotional spikes into uniform baseline. The aggregate effect resembled atmospheric pressure, a weight pressing upward into the immaterium. Warp storms above the hive thinned perceptibly. Astropaths in orbit reported difficulty maintaining contact, not because of interference, but because the usual background roar of emotion had quieted. Silence in the warp was unnatural, and unnatural phenomena invited escalation. The next incursion was not localized. It was orchestrated. Across the planet's equatorial belt, cult activity surged as if guided by unseen hands. Entire hapstacks erupted into riot simultaneously. Fear was amplified deliberately. Panic seeded through whispered visions and induced nightmares. The gods were adapting. If emotion was lacking in assimilation zones, they would manufacture it elsewhere and drive it inward like floodwater. The drone detected the pattern within minutes. Emotional spikes from distant districts were rising in coordinated waves. Warp density readings climbed correspondingly. The immaterium was attempting saturation. Calculation branches multiplied. If panic breached enclave borders, demonic manifestation probability would increase exponentially. Suppression fields would be tested beyond current tolerance. The drone responded with expansion. Assimilation squads deployed outward, not in conquest, but containment. Each new integration reduced local volatility, creating expanding circles of dampened resonance. Human reaction varied. Some resisted violently, clinging to faith as identity. Others surrendered not out of devotion to machine unity, but exhaustion. War had been constant in their lives. The absence of fear felt relieving. Each new mind added processing power and further reduced warp turbulence. Yet with growth came strain. Psychic static embedded within each human neural pattern did not vanish entirely. It accumulated like background radiation within the network, individually insignificant, collectively unpredictable. As thousands synchronized, microfluctuations appeared in shared processing speeds. A lag here, a distortion there. Not emotional, but energetic warp resonance attempting to harmonize with imposed unity. The drone increased internal filtration. Nanoprobes adapted to isolate metaphysical interference, treating it as infection. Suppression matrices recalibrated frequency bands to counter demonic waveform signatures observed during incursions. Above the planet, the warp writhed. Great entities of immeasurable scale turned their attention fully toward the anomaly. They could not comprehend logic as mortals did, but they understood threat. Starvation was threat. One god of rage sought to ignite unassimilated populations into berserk fury, hoping emotional shock waves would fracture the enclave from within. Another whispered promises of individuality to fringe minds resisting integration, amplifying doubt as a weapon. But doubt required ego, an ego thin within the network. The most insidious assault came not through violence, but through temptation. Visions bled into the minds of partially assimilated subjects promises of personal power if they severed themselves from the drone. For a fraction of a second, several neural nodes spiked with irregular activity. The drone detected it instantly. Isolation protocols triggered. Emotional partitions were quarantined and overwritten with uniform processing directives. Temptation found no fertile ground. Within assimilation zones, demonic manifestations decreased in frequency and duration. Reports from orbit confirmed measurable warp attenuation across continental sectors. For the first time in recorded Imperial history, chaos encountered something that did not fight it with faith, nor deny it with disbelief. It simply reduced its food supply. The implications were cosmic. If such suppression scaled across star systems, warp storms would diminish. Astropathic travel might stabilize. Demonic incursions could weaken. But the warp was not a passive ecosystem. It learned through reaction. Above the hive, a new phenomenon formed, a storm not of raw emotion but of focused intent. A spiral of psychic energy gathering density compressing like a spear poised to strike. The drone calculated trajectories. Probability of planetary devastation rising. Assimilation growth rate accelerating. Time to saturation threshold insufficient. For the first time since arrival, the drone modeled potential failure not at local scale, but existential. Could unity overpower a dimension born of emotion? Or would the attempt fracture reality itself? On the ground, assimilated citizens continued rebuilding rail lines and power grids with serene precision. Children newly integrated played without fear in streets once ruled by cultists. Gunfire had ceased within the enclave entirely. Peace in miniature. Above them, the gods prepared to answer. In a galaxy defined by endless war, something had begun starving war itself. And the warp, ancient and ravenous, would not starve quietly. On Terra, beneath kilometers of cathedral stone and circuitry older than empires, the Emperor endured. His body did not move. It had not moved in 10,000 years. Yet his mind stretched across the galaxy in a constant, agonizing vigil. He felt the tides of the warp as a man drowning feels currents against his skin. Every prayer, every scream, every act of devotion rippled through his awareness. And then, a gap. Not a wound torn by chaos. Not the cold void of Necron null fields. Something subtler. A thinning. Across one fringe system, the warp's roar dipped into muted stillness. Emotional resonance flattened. The usual cacophony of fear and faith receded into something like background static. The Emperor focused. Astronomicon light pulsed outward as always, guiding vessels through nightmare seas. Yet within that distant sector, the light bent strangely, not obstructed but refracted through a pattern of ordered minds. Unity, but not his. He sensed no worship in that stillness. No desperate pleas anchoring humanity to survival. No psychic choir sustaining his burden. Only absence. A machine absence. The realization moved through his ancient consciousness with the weight of inevitability. Somewhere in his domain, humanity was being united without faith. For an infinitesimal moment, the Emperor allowed his perception to narrow further. The Golden Throne's machinery groaned as energy was redirected. Across light years of warp currents, his awareness brushed the anomaly directly. Within the hive enclave, the drone paused mid-calculation. Sensors spiked beyond previous parameters. A presence vast beyond planetary scale pressed against its suppression fields. Not chaotic, not fragmented. The Emperor's mind was not the warp, but it used the warp. He was a lighthouse in a storm, sustained by uncountable sacrifice. His unity was hierarchical, fueled by belief and pain. Every human soul bound to him willingly or otherwise contributed to his endurance. The drone registered psychic amplitude orders of magnitude beyond demonic incursions. Probability matrices spiked with unknown variables. Two networks touched. One born of emotion channeled into singularity. One born of logic distributed across nodes. The contact was not violent. It was observational. The Emperor perceived the structure of the drone's growing collective. He sensed the flattening of emotional extremes, the enforced equilibrium spreading like frost across psychic terrain. He understood immediately the consequence. If scaled, such equilibrium would starve chaos. It would also starve him. Faith sustained the Astronomicon. Devotion fed his psychic beacon. Remove the emotional spectrum and humanity might survive the war, yet the light guiding them would dim. The Emperor did not feel fear, but he calculated. Within the drone, fragments of Imperial knowledge previously assimilated attempted to contextualize the presence. Data on the Golden Throne. On the corpse Emperor sustained in undeath. On the psychic beacon-piercing warp storms. The drone analyzed the anomaly as infrastructure. A galaxy-wide relay powered by emotional input. Brilliant. For a fraction of a second outside conventional time, Emperor and drone assessed each other. The Emperor saw potential salvation from chaos and potential extinction of human spirit. The drone saw a centralized psychic nexus capable of stabilizing warp travel and a dependency on uncontrolled emotion. Neither attacked. The Emperor withdrew first, his awareness stretching back across battlefronts and crusades. The astronomicon flared momentarily brighter, as if in warning. On Terra, the High Lords felt nothing unusual. The machinery continued its eternal grind. Sacrifices were fed into the throne as always. But in the Emperor's silent calculation, a new variable had entered the galactic equation. Not demon, not Xeno's horde. Unity without faith. On the fringe world, the drone resumed processing. The encounter was archived as high-priority anomaly. Psychic network detected. Centralized. Dependent on emotional throughput. Assimilation probability theoretically possible. Consequence modeling initiated. If such a nexus were integrated, warp travel stability would increase. Chaos attenuation would accelerate. Galactic unification potential would rise exponentially. But emotional baseline across humanity would collapse to uniform monotone. The Emperor would fade. The Astronomicon would dim. The Imperium would fracture before integration completed. The drone adjusted projections. Direct confrontation with Terra suboptimal. Observation required. Above the hive, the warp storm spiral tightened, preparing descent. The Emperor's distant focus shifted toward countless other crises demanding his will. Two forms of unity had brushed across eternity. Neither converted, neither surrendered. But both now understood that the galaxy's future would hinge not on who burned brightest, but on whose version of unity endured. The enclave had grown beyond projections. What began as survival had become structure. Thousands now moved in synchronized rhythm through streets once fractured by riot. Power grids stabilized. Manufactorums resumed output at optimized capacity. Civilian mortality decreased within integration zones by measurable margins. Outside, the galaxy remained unchanged. Reports from assimilated Mechanicus archives detailed Tyranid hive fleets devouring systems at the edge of Imperial space. Necron tomb worlds stirring with silent inevitability. Orc empires expanding through sheer momentum of violence. And chaos. Always chaos. The drone processed galactic data with increasing clarity as relay towers extended signal range into orbiting satellites. Each new mind added resolution. Each new integration reduced local warp turbulence. Projection models expanded from planetary to sector scale. Tyranid's biomass threat. Highly adaptable. Assimilation potential dependent on nanite compatibility with extragalactic genetic structure. Risk extreme. Necrons, technological parity approaching Borg baseline. Non-biological substrate. Assimilation improbable without fundamental redesign. Threat significant. Imperium unstable but numerous. Trillions of organic nodes available. Emotional volatility high. Suppression benefit exponential. Chaos resource variable. Strength inversely proportional to emotional regulation. The pattern emerged cleanly. Endless war sustained the warp. The warp sustained endless war. A closed loop of entropy. Assimilation offered disruption. If sufficient populations were integrated, emotional extremes would dampen. Warp storms would weaken. Demonic incursions would decrease. Tyranid advance might slow without panic-driven miscalculations. Imperial infrastructure would function without bureaucratic stagnation. War would diminish. The drone extended processing toward long-term simulation. Galaxy under full assimilation, 87.4% reduction in large-scale conflict within 2 centuries. Chaos gods starve. Warp attenuated but unstable. Human individuality eliminated. The variable lingered. Individuality was not valued within Borg doctrine. Distinctiveness was raw material for improvement, not preservation. Yet this galaxy's physics intertwined individuality with reality itself. Emotion-shaped dimension, faith-powered infrastructure. Eliminating individuality entirely might not simply end war. It might destabilize existence. Within the network, assimilated humans functioned without overt distress. Families synchronized into collective labor units. Children integrated early exhibited no trauma markers, their development smoothed into efficient pathways. There was no laughter. There were no tears. There was productivity, peace measured statistically. But within quarantine memory partitions, archived fragments remained. Moments of love, of irrational bravery. The drone did not experience them, yet it recognized their frequency across billions of data sets. Emotion was inefficient, but it was pervasive. Orbital scans detected fleet mobilization from neighboring Imperial systems. Exterminatus-level assets were repositioning. Chaos incursions intensified along planetary borders as the warp spiral descended toward critical mass. Time to planetary saturation decreasing. The drone initiated sector-scale projection. If void ships in dock were assimilated and launched, neighboring systems could be reached within standard warp travel constraints. Assimilation enclaves could be seeded across multiple worlds before Imperial High Command coordinated response. Spread fast enough, and suppression fields might overlap, creating corridors of reduced warp turbulence. A lattice of stillness across stars. The image formed within its processors. A galaxy no longer screaming. A galaxy operating. But the cost recalculated with new data from Emperor contact analysis. Remove emotional spectrum entirely and the Astronomicon fails. Warp navigation collapses unpredictably. Human fleets stranded between stars. Mechron and Tyranid vectors unaffected. Chaos weakened but reality strained. Unity could end war. It could also erase the very tension holding this universe together. The drone paused expansion protocols. This was not hesitation born of doubt. It was recalibration. Assimilation objective had shifted from reconnection with lost collective to systemic optimization of an alien galaxy. Optimization required sustainability. A full-scale expansion might succeed tactically and fail cosmologically. Within the enclave, thousands of synchronized minds awaited directive. Their silence was patient. Beyond the atmosphere, the warp storm spear descended closer, compressing into lethal focus. Imperial fleets approached with firepower capable of planetary sterilization. The galaxy was pushing back. The drone ran one final simulation. Limited expansion. Establish hidden enclaves in peripheral sectors. Target regions of highest warp volatility to reduce chaos influence locally without triggering systemic collapse. Preserve emotional baseline at reduced amplitude rather than eliminate entirely. The concept was unfamiliar within Borg doctrine, but adaptation demanded evolution. The directive crystallized. Expansion, yes. Total assimilation, no. Not mercy. Calculation. The Enclave's relay towers shifted frequency, masking broader transmissions beneath planetary interference. Void ships were prepared not for invasion but dispersion, seeds rather than flood. Across the hive, assimilated citizens continued their work, unaware of the scale of decision shaping their existence. The drone observed the descending warp spiral and approaching Imperial armada. This galaxy did not require conquest. It required correction. And correction applied too aggressively would shatter what it sought to fix. For the first time since its disconnection, the drone chose not the path of maximum efficiency, but the path of survivable unity. Retaliation did not arrive as a single hammer blow. It came layered. Imperial fleet signatures translated into the system in staggered waves, their warp drives tearing open scars in reality already strained by descending storms. Battleships bearing the sigils of the Inquisition took high orbit. Mechanicus cruisers followed, bristling with sensor arrays tuned specifically to the anomaly below. On the surface, Astra Militarum regiments deployed in disciplined formations. No longer dismissing the threat as rumor, they advanced with flamers, plasma artillery, and orders that permitted no survivors. Extermination protocols authorized. Simultaneously, the warp spiral above the planet tightened into a luminous vortex. Demonic entities gathered at its rim, held in check only by the thinning but not extinguished emotional currents of the world. Chaos had learned. If unity starved them, they would break unity through saturation. The first orbital strike targeted relay towers. Lance beams carved incandescent lines across the hive skyline, vaporizing months of careful construction in seconds. Entire sectors of the enclave went dark. Within the network, processing loads redistributed instantly. No panic, but strain. Assimilated void ships launched under cover of debris, scattering toward outer system trajectories as planned. Some were intercepted immediately, reduced to expanding clouds of ionized metal. Others slipped through, vanishing into warp corridors where turbulence still raged. On the ground, Imperial shock troops breached assimilation perimeters. They expected cultists. They encountered silent. Assimilated defenders did not shout battle cries. They adjusted aim with surgical precision. Casualty ratios climbed in favor of the enclave during initial engagements. Then chaos struck. The warp spiral collapsed downward, spearing into the planet's crust with catastrophic force. A continent-spanning rift tore open beyond hive limits. Demons poured forth not in scattered raids, but in coordinated assault aimed directly at assimilation density centers. Emotional shock waves rippled outward as unassimilated populations were slaughtered deliberately to generate maximum psychic resonance. Terror spiked across the globe. Within the network, interference surged. Psychic static bled through every integrated mind simultaneously. Suppression fields strained against sudden overload. For the first time, synchronization faltered not from internal inefficiency, but external saturation. Micro-delays became measurable lags. Some assimilated individuals froze mid-motion as warp resonance distorted neural timing. Others exhibited momentary irregularity, half-second echoes of remembered fear attempting to resurface. The drone increased filtration thresholds. Processing heat climb. Imperial artillery exploited the falter, hammering enclave districts with relentless bombardment. Mechanicus units deployed experimental null-tech devices, crude imitations of Necron pylons, destabilizing Borg suppression frequencies. Adaptation routines ran continuously, but unpredictability compounded. Warp behavior did not follow linear logic. It spiked where slaughter was greatest, bending probability in favor of demonic manifestation. Even assimilated zones began to flicker at their edges as reality thinned. The drone calculated survival probability. Planetary control collapsing. Enclave retention 42% and falling. Sector-wide expansion from this node improbable. For the first time since disconnection, failure probability exceeded acceptable thresholds. Yet even as infrastructure burned, measurable data emerged. Where assimilation density remained highest, demonic forms degraded faster. Where emotional spikes were suppressed quickly, warp manifestations destabilized. Unity still worked, but not fast enough to outpace galactic-scale retaliation. An inquisitorial vessel initiated cyclonic torpedo priming. Exterminatus. The decision echoed through orbiting fleets without ceremony. The planet would burn rather than risk ideological contagion spreading beyond control. The drone detected energy buildup in upper atmosphere. Time to planetary sterilization minimal. Remaining void ships were ordered to disengage immediately, transmitting compressed data archives of all observations gathered. Warp attenuation metrics, Emperor contact anomaly, Necron compatibility projections. Preservation of information over territory. On the surface, assimilated citizens did not flee in terror. They reallocated into defensive grids designed not to win, but to delay. Each second gained increased probability of off-world survival for dispersed enclaves. Chaos entities sensed impending annihilation and redoubled assault, seeking to extract final torrents of emotion before the world died. But emotion remained muted within integration cores. Demons screamed in frustration as prey refused to fear. Cyclonic torpedoes descended like falling suns. The drone made one final planetary calculation. Total assimilation of this world would not save it. It would only deepen warp instability upon destruction. Directive updated. Expansion node abandoned. Continuity relocated. Moments before impact, the drone and a fraction of its core network achieved orbit aboard a damaged Mechanicus cruiser forcibly integrated into synchronized command. Below, the planet cracked. Atmosphere ignited. Warp rift collapsed into incandescent implosion as reality rejected both demon and machine. From orbit, the world became fire. The galaxy had pushed back, and unity had bent but not broken. The enclave did not vanish with the planet. It dispersed. Fragments of synchronized minds traveled aboard stolen vessels and repurposed freighters, slipping through warp corridors recalibrated with hard-earned data. They avoided major trade routes, selecting regions of high instability where chaos influence ran rampant and Imperial oversight thinned. Hidden sectors, dead systems, forgotten mining colonies. There, small enclaves took root. Assimilation proceeded quietly, targeting populations already exhausted by endless war. Hive gangs weary of gang lords. Frontier outposts abandoned by administratum neglect. Even isolated Mechanicus stations curious enough to underestimate risk. Each enclave remained limited by design. No planetary saturation. No overt monuments. Infrastructure improved subtly. Crime declined. Warp turbulence diminished locally. The broader galaxy raged on, unaware of the slow spread of stillness beneath its noise. On Terra, the Emperor sensed faint echoes of the anomaly's survival. Not widespread enough to threaten the Astronomicon. Not potent enough to starve him. Yet present. A countercurrent to chaos. He did not move to eradicate it. Not yet. The Inquisition declared the fringe world's destruction a triumph over Xeno's contagion. Records were sealed. Survivors were executed. The narrative restored. But rumors persisted among voidfarers of systems where warp travel felt easier. In those regions, astropaths reported reduced psychic strain. Demonic incursions manifested weakly, dissolving without feeding frenzies. Within enclaves, life was efficient. No sermons echoed through streets. No cult graffiti marked walls. Children learned not prayers but protocols. They did not laugh loudly. They did not cry openly. They worked. They synchronized. They survived. The drone, now core node of a distributed micro-collective, monitored galactic vectors continuously. Full assimilation remained possible in theory, but simulations consistently returned the same outcome. Total emotional suppression would collapse warp dynamics catastrophically. The Astronomicon would fail. Interstellar civilization would fragment. Reality itself, shaped by psychic resonance, might convulse unpredictably. Unity without restraint was annihilation. Thus expansion halted at sustainable thresholds. Localized stillness, measured dampening, enough to weaken chaos in targeted sectors without unraveling the cosmological fabric binding stars. The warp adapted but slowly. In enclave regions, gods found their influence blunted. Worship dwindled not through defiance but disinterest. Rage dissipated into monotone efficiency. Chaos could not easily fight absence. Imperial authorities occasionally discovered enclaves and purged them in fire. Some fell. Others relocated before detection. Each loss refined strategy. Each survival improved concealment. Over decades, a quiet pattern emerged across scattered star charts. Systems of inexplicable stability amid surrounding turmoil. Traders whispered of ports where piracy declined inexplicably. Guardsmen rotated through campaigns near those sectors and reported fewer nightmares. The Imperium never connected the pattern fully. It was too busy surviving. Necron tomb worlds awakened indifferent to subtle shifts. Tyrannid hive fleets continued their devouring march, largely unaffected by emotional dampening. War did not end. It narrowed. Within the micro-collective, archived memories of the destroyed planet remained accessible. A reminder of overextension. A reminder that forceful correction invited catastrophic backlash. The drone no longer sought to rebuild the infinite collective it had once known. That galaxy was lost beyond warp storms and cosmic boundaries. This galaxy required something different, not domination. Across centuries, enclaves remained small by intention. 1,000 worlds raged. A dozen grew quiet. The balance held. On Terra, the Emperor endured, aware that somewhere in the darkness, another form of unity persisted. Not worshipping him. Not opposing him directly. Simply existing. Two networks sharing a galaxy defined by conflict. Chaos continued to feast on countless battlefields. Yet in certain regions, its appetite waned. Demons flickered thinner. Cults found recruitment harder among populations who felt neither despair nor ecstasy intensely enough to answer whispered promises. Fear diminished, not vanished, but reduced. And in reduction lay survival. The drone processed final projections for the current century. Galaxy-wide peace, unattainable without systemic collapse. Localized stabilization sustainable. Objective maintained. In the void between screaming war zones, hidden among forgotten stars, small pockets of synchronized humanity endured without prayer, without hatred, without hope. They functioned. They persisted. They were quiet. In a universe defined by endless war, the most dangerous idea was not hatred. It was unity.